The battlefield of Principal's Sterling Medical Institute stood like a crystal fortress in the heart of Manhattan, its glass exterior reflecting the ambitions and dreams of everyone who walked through its doors. Inside those polished walls, Dr. Sienna Vale commanded respect from every corner of the surgical department. At 32, she had already performed over 500 successful cardiac surgeries, her steady hands and sharper mind making her one of the most sought-after surgeons on the East Coast. Her colleagues admired her dedication, her patients trusted her completely, and her reputation preceded her wherever she went. Sienna had fought for everything she had. Growing up in a small town in Ohio, she was the daughter of a factory worker and a schoolteacher who scraped together every penny to give her a chance at medical school. She remembered the nights her mother stayed up late, sewing clothes for neighbors to earn extra money, and her father working double shifts just so she could afford textbooks. Those memories fueled her determination. She refused to compromise her principles for anyone, especially not for men who measured success by the zeros in their bank accounts rather than the lives they saved. Marcus Ashford represented everything Sienna despised about modern healthcare. At 38, he had inherited the Ashford Medical Group from his late father and transformed it into a billion-dollar empire spanning across 12 states. He was known in business circles as the Ice King, someone who made decisions with cold precision and showed no mercy to competitors or subordinates who failed to meet his expectations. Marcus believed that a hospital was a business first and a place of healing second. Without profitability, he argued, there would be no hospital at all to save lives. Their first encounter happened during a budget meeting 3 years ago. Sienna had walked into the boardroom, expecting to discuss expanding the cardiac unit to accommodate more low-income patients. Instead, she found herself facing Marcus Ashford, who had just announced plans to cut funding for charity care by 40%. "Patients aren't commodities, Mr. Ashford," Sienna had declared, her green eyes blazing with fury. "They're human beings who deserve care regardless of their ability to pay." Marcus had leaned back in his leather chair, studying her with those penetrating gray eyes that seemed to see through every defense. "And doctors aren't saints, Dr. Vale. This hospital operates in the real world, where bills must be paid and investors must see returns. Your idealism is admirable, but impractical." From that moment, they were locked in an ongoing war. Every meeting became a battlefield where Sienna fought for her patients and Marcus fought for his bottom line. The hospital staff learned to avoid scheduling them in the same room unless absolutely necessary. Yet despite their mutual antagonism, neither could deny a strange undercurrent of tension that had nothing to do with business disagreements. Barcelona Nights, the annual international medical conference in Barcelona, brought together the finest medical minds from around the world. Sienna had been invited to present her groundbreaking research on minimally invasive cardiac procedures. She arrived at the luxurious Hotel Arts Barcelona, exhausted from the flight, but determined to make the most of this opportunity to connect with colleagues and potentially secure funding for her research projects. The conference gala took place on the hotel's rooftop terrace, with the Mediterranean Sea stretching endlessly beneath a star-filled sky. Sienna wore a deep emerald dress that complemented her auburn hair, which she had let down for once instead of pulling it back into her usual professional bun. She felt out of place among the glamorous crowd, nursing a glass of champagne and wishing she could return to her room with a good medical journal. "I didn't expect to see you at an event like this, Dr. Vale." That deep, familiar voice sent an involuntary shiver down her spine. Sienna turned to find Marcus Ashford standing beside her, looking devastatingly handsome in a midnight blue suit that probably cost more than her monthly salary. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and those gray eyes held their usual mixture of challenge and something else she couldn't quite identify. "I could say the same about you," she replied coolly, taking a sip of champagne to steady herself. "I thought you'd be too busy counting money to attend an actual medical conference." Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Even I occasionally remember that medicine is supposed to be about science, not just spreadsheets. Your presentation this morning was impressive, by the way, though I suppose it's easier to innovate when you don't have to worry about whether the hospital can afford to implement your ideas." "There it is," Sienna said, her voice sharp. I was wondering how long it would take before you turned this into another lecture about fiscal responsibility. Can't you just admit for once that saving lives matters more than profit margins? Can't. You admit that without profit margins, there would be no hospital to save lives in, Marcus countered, stepping closer. The scent of his cologne, subtle notes of sandalwood, and something darker invaded her senses. You see me as the villain, Sienna? But I'm the reason you have an operating room to work your miracles in. The use of her first name caught her off guard. He had never called her anything but Dr. Vale before. Something shifted in the air between them, the familiar antagonism taking on a different edge. The champagne was making her bolder than usual. Or perhaps it was the way the moonlight cast shadows across his angular features, softening the harsh lines she associated with his ruthless business persona. You want to know what I really think, Marcus? She emphasized his name, watching his eyes darken slightly. I think you hide behind your balance sheets because you're afraid of actually connecting with people. It's easier to see patients as numbers because then you don't have to feel anything when we lose them. Marcus's jaw tightened, a flash of something raw and vulnerable crossing his face before he masked it with his usual cool expression. And you hide behind your righteous anger because you're terrified of admitting that the world isn't as black and white as you want it to be. Not everyone who makes difficult financial decisions is a monster, Sienna. They stood there, the tension crackling between them like electricity. The sounds of the gala faded into background noise. Sienna's heart pounded in her chest, and she couldn't tell if it was from anger or something far more dangerous. Before she could stop herself, she closed the distance between them, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. I hate you, Marcus Ashford. His eyes searched hers, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with an emotion she'd never heard from him before. I know. I hate you too. Then his lips were on hers, and Sienna forgot every reason why this was a terrible idea. The kiss was fierce and desperate, 3 years of pent-up tension exploding in a single moment. His hands tangled in her hair while hers gripped the lapels of his expensive suit, pulling him closer even as her rational mind screamed at her to stop. They barely made it to his hotel suite. Clothes were discarded in a trail leading to the bedroom, hands exploring with an urgency that left no room for second thoughts. Sienna had never been impulsive, had never done anything like this in her entire carefully planned life. But in Marcus's arms, she found herself letting go of all her rigid control, surrendering to sensations she'd never allowed herself to feel before. The night passed in a blur of passion and intensity. They came together again and again, as if trying to purge years of frustration and desire through physical connection. In the darkness, with nothing between them but heated skin and ragged breathing, they were no longer adversaries. They were simply two people who had fought against an inevitable attraction for far too long. Morning reckoning dawn light filtering through the curtains woke Sienna from a deep sleep. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then she felt the weight of an arm across her waist and the warmth of a body pressed against her back, and reality crashed down with horrifying clarity. She had slept with Marcus Ashford, the man she despised, the enemy of everything she stood for, her professional rival and personal nemesis. And worst of all, it had been the most incredible night of her entire life. Carefully, Sienna extracted herself from his embrace, holding her breath as he stirred but didn't wake. She gathered her clothes with shaking hands, dressing as quietly as possible. On the nightstand, his phone buzzed with incoming messages, probably urgent business matters that couldn't wait even at 6 in the morning. The sight of it reminded her exactly who Marcus Ashford was, a man who would always choose business over people, profit over principles. What had she been thinking? She hadn't been thinking at all, and that was the problem. She had let champagne and moonlight and 3 years of sexual tension override her better judgment. Now she had to face the consequences of the biggest mistake of her life. Sienna paused at the door, looking back at Marcus's sleeping form. In sleep, without that calculating expression he always wore, he looked younger, almost vulnerable. Her traitorous heart stuttered in her chest, but she ruthlessly suppressed the feeling. This could never happen again. They existed in different worlds with incompatible values, and one night of passion couldn't change that fundamental truth. She slipped out of the room and hurried back to her own suite, where she stood under a scalding shower trying to wash away the memory of his touch. But his scent lingered on her skin, and she couldn't stop replaying every moment of the night before. The way he had looked at her with such intensity, the surprising gentleness of his hands despite the urgency of their coupling, the way he had whispered her name like a prayer against her skin. It meant nothing, she told her reflection in the mirror, forcing conviction into her voice. It was a mistake, a moment of weakness. It will never happen again. But even as she said the words, Sienna felt the lie in them. Something had shifted between them last night, something that couldn't be undone no matter how much she wished otherwise. Unwanted revelations. 6 weeks later, Sienna stood in her private bathroom at the hospital, staring at 3 positive pregnancy tests lined up on the counter. Her hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the sink, her medical mind racing through the implications while her emotions spiraled into panic. This couldn't be happening. She had been careful, religiously so, about her birth control. But she had been stressed, had skipped pills during the conference chaos. One night. One single night of letting her guard down, and now her entire carefully constructed life was falling apart. She was pregnant with Marcus Ashford's child, the man she had avoided for the past 6 weeks, ducking into empty rooms when she saw him coming, scheduling her meetings at times when he wouldn't be present. The man who had sent her exactly 1 text message after Barcelona, "We need to talk about what happened." She had deleted it without responding and blocked his number, determined to pretend that night had never occurred. But now there was no pretending. There was a life growing inside her, a tiny cluster of cells that would become a baby in 7.5 months. Marcus's baby, her baby, their baby. Sienna's legs gave out, and she sank to the floor, hugging her knees to her chest. She was 32 years old at the peak of her career, with surgeries scheduled months in advance and research projects that depended on her continued focus and availability. She had no room in her life for a child, let alone one whose father was a man she fundamentally disagreed with on every important issue. And Marcus. God, what would Marcus say? Would he demand she terminate the pregnancy? Would he try to take custody, raising their child to value money over morality? Would he even believe the baby was his? Or would he accuse her of trying to trap him? Sienna pressed her hands to her still flat stomach, feeling nothing yet but knowing that would change soon. Despite her fear and confusion, despite every logical reason why this was a disaster, she felt a fierce protective surge. This was her baby. She would figure out how to manage her career and single motherhood. She would raise this child with the values that mattered: love, compassion, dedication to helping others. And Marcus Ashford would never need to know. She would keep this secret, protect her child from his influence, and handle everything on her own. It was better this way, safer. She could do this alone. She had always been strong enough to handle whatever life threw at her. But as Sienna cleaned up the tests and returned to work, she couldn't shake the image of Marcus's face that night in Barcelona, the unexpected vulnerability in his eyes when she had accused him of being afraid to feel. She remembered the gentleness of his touch, so at odds with his corporate ruthlessness. And despite everything she told herself, a small, treacherous part of her wondered if she was making a terrible mistake by cutting him out of their child's life before it even began. Unveiling heart's hidden truths. 3 months into her pregnancy, Sienna had perfected the art of deception. Loose-fitting scrubs concealed her slightly rounded belly. Strategic scheduling ensured she avoided prolonged contact with anyone who might notice her frequent bathroom trips or subtle changes in appearance. She had confided in only one person, Dr. Naomi Chen, her closest friend and colleague in the cardiology department, who had promptly declared Sienna both incredibly brave and incredibly foolish for planning to hide the pregnancy from Marcus. "He's going to find out eventually," Naomi warned over lunch in Sienna's office where they could speak privately. "Sterling Medical isn't that large, and Marcus Ashford isn't blind. You're already starting to show, and you can't perform surgeries indefinitely. What's your plan for when you're 7 months pregnant and waddling through the halls?" Sienna pushed her salad around her plate, her appetite diminished by constant nausea. I'll take an early leave. Tell everyone it's for a research sabbatical. By the time I return with a baby, enough time will have passed that no one will think to question the timing. Except Marcus, Naomi pointed out gently. Sienna, I know you two have history, and not the good kind. But he has a right to know he's going to be a father. Whatever else he is, denying him that knowledge isn't fair. Fair? Sienna's voice rose despite her effort to stay calm. What's fair about bringing a child into the world where its father values money over human life? Marcus Ashford would probably try to calculate the cost-benefit ratio of parenting before deciding whether to be involved. Our child deserves better than someone who sees people as line items on a balance sheet. Naomi sighed, recognizing the stubborn set of Sienna's jaw that meant no amount of logic would change her mind. Just promise me you'll reconsider. I've seen how Marcus looks at you when he thinks no one's watching. There's more going on there than you want to admit. But Sienna dismissed the suggestion. Whatever fleeting attraction or temporary insanity had led to that night in Barcelona, it didn't change the fundamental incompatibility between them. She and Marcus existed in opposition, and a baby wouldn't bridge that gap. If anything, it would only create more conflict, more battles over how to raise a child with such radically different value systems. The unraveling Marcus Ashford had built an empire on his ability to read people, to spot inconsistencies and hidden truths beneath carefully maintained facades. So he knew something was very wrong with Sienna Vale long before she was ready to admit it. She had been avoiding him since Barcelona, which initially stung his pride more than he cared to acknowledge. That night had meant something to him, something he couldn't quite name but felt deeply. He had wanted to talk about it, to understand what had happened between them and whether it could be something more than a one-time mistake. But Sienna had made it clear through her radio silence that she regretted everything. Then, about 3 months after the conference, Marcus started noticing subtle changes. Sienna left meetings early with vague excuses. She no longer engaged him in their usual heated debates, instead offering brief responses and avoiding eye contact. Her scrubs seemed looser, her face slightly fuller. And once, when he passed her, in the hallway she pressed a hand to her stomach in a gesture that was unmistakably protective. The possibility hit him like a physical blow. She was pregnant. And given the timing and her deliberate avoidance of him, there was only one conclusion to draw about the father's identity. Marcus spent a week convincing himself he was wrong, that his mind was playing tricks born from wishful thinking he barely understood. But his instincts had never failed him in business, and they weren't failing him now. Sienna was carrying his child, and she had no intention of telling him. The realization sent him through a cascade of emotions he had spent most of his adult life suppressing. Anger that she would keep something so monumental from him. Fear that he would fail as a father the way his own father had failed him. Too obsessed with business to truly be present. And beneath it all, a fierce possessive joy that threatened to overwhelm his carefully constructed emotional walls. He was going to be a father. He and Sienna had created a life together, however unintentionally. And he would be damned if she shut him out of his child's existence. Marcus didn't confront her immediately. Instead, he watched and waited, gathering information with the same methodical approach he applied to business acquisitions. He noted her appointments with the obstetrics department under an assumed name. He observed her carefully concealed exhaustion and the way her hand instinctively moved to her stomach when she thought no one was looking. And he felt his resolve hardening with each passing day. The confrontation came on a rainy Tuesday evening. Sienna had stayed late to finish paperwork, and Marcus ensured they would be alone by dismissing his assistant early and waiting in his office until he saw her leaving the building. He intercepted her in the parking garage, stepping out from behind a concrete pillar as she hurried toward her car. "We need to talk, Dr. Vale." Sienna froze, her keys clutched in one hand and her bag pressed protectively against her stomach. Even in the dim fluorescent lighting, Marcus could see the fear flash across her face before she masked it with defiance. "I don't have anything to say to you, Mr. Ashford. Please move out of my way." "How far along are you?" he asked quietly, stepping closer. 3 months? 4? The color drained from Sienna's face. For a moment she looked like she might deny it, might try to maintain the charade. But then her shoulders sagged slightly, and he saw the exhaustion she'd been hiding for months. "It doesn't concern you," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Marcus felt something crack in his chest. "Doesn't concern me? Sienna, I'm not an idiot. I know the baby is mine." "You don't know anything," she shot back, but tears were welling in her eyes. "Just leave me alone, Marcus. You've never cared about anything except your profit margins and your empire. This child doesn't need someone like you in their life." The words cut deeper than any business rival's betrayal ever had. Marcus closed the distance between them, his voice raw with an emotion he couldn't hide. "Is that really what you think of me? That I'm so heartless I wouldn't care about my own child? I think you're a man who sees everything as a transaction." Sienna whispered, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "And a baby isn't a business deal. They need love, stability, someone who will put them first. Can you honestly tell me you're capable of that?" Marcus wanted to argue, to defend himself with cold logic and sharp retorts. But looking at Sienna standing there, vulnerable and terrified and protecting their child from him, he realized she was asking the question he had been afraid to confront himself. Could he be a good father? Could he be the kind of man who deserved to raise a child with the woman he had come to care for far more than was wise or convenient? "I don't know," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "My own father wasn't exactly a sterling example of parenting. He taught me how to run a business, but forgot to teach me how to be human. But Sienna, I want to try. This baby is mine too, and I'm not walking away. You can hate me, fight me, shut me out all you want, but I will be part of our child's life." Sienna stared at him, searching his face for signs of deception or manipulation. But all she saw was raw honesty and a vulnerability that Marcus Ashford never showed the world. Slowly, she placed a hand on her stomach, and Marcus watched the gesture with an expression of such longing that it broke something loose in her carefully guarded heart. "I'm scared," she confessed, her voice cracking. "I'm scared of doing this alone, but I'm even more scared of what happens if we try to do it together. We can't even have a conversation without fighting. How are we supposed to raise a child?" Marcus reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he gently cupped her face, wiping away her tears with his thumb. "Maybe we start by being honest with each other. No more hiding, no more running. We figure this out together, even if we stumble along the way." Standing in that parking garage, with rain hammering on the concrete above them and years of antagonism and misunderstanding between them, something shifted. It wasn't love yet, not the kind that poets wrote about, or that made everything easy. But it was a beginning, a fragile tentative connection built on the shared future growing inside Sienna's body. 4 months, she finally said. "I'm 4 months, pregnant. It's a girl." Marcus's breath caught. A daughter. He was going to have a daughter. The enormity of it crashed over him, leaving him momentarily speechless. When he found his voice again, it was thick with emotion. "A girl. We're having a girl." Sienna nodded, and despite everything, she found herself smiling slightly. "Yes, we are." Crisis in connection. The pregnancy was high risk from the beginning. At 28 weeks, Sienna's blood pressure spiked dangerously high, and she was immediately hospitalized with severe preeclampsia. The cheerful optimism she had been trying to maintain shattered in the face of cold medical reality. Her life and their daughter's life were both in jeopardy. Marcus had spent the past month slowly inserting himself into Sienna's life, attending doctor appointments when she allowed it, researching prenatal nutrition with the same intensity he applied to corporate acquisitions, and gradually proving that he meant what he said about being involved. But nothing had prepared him for the terror of watching Sienna deteriorate over the course of 48 hours. She lay in the hospital bed, looking small and fragile in ways she never had before, her skin pale against the white sheets and dark circles shadowing her eyes. Monitors beeped steadily, tracking every vital sign, while nurses came and went with practiced efficiency. Marcus sat beside her, holding her hand and refusing to leave, despite the medical staff's gentle suggestions. that he rest. "You should go home," Sienna said weakly, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's nothing you can do here." "I'm not leaving," Marcus replied firmly, his grip on her hand tightening. "I promised I wouldn't run, and I keep my promises." The obstetrician, Dr. Helen Rodriguez, delivered the news they had both been dreading. "We need to deliver the baby now. Waiting any longer puts both of you at too great a risk. At 28 weeks, she'll need intensive care, but our NICU is one of the best. She has a strong chance." A strong chance. Medical speak for it could go either way. Sienna had spent her career delivering similar news to patients' families. She knew all too well what those careful, neutral words really meant. "I'm not ready," she whispered, her free hand instinctively protecting her stomach. "It's too soon. She needs more time." Marcus leaned close, pressing his forehead to hers, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "Hey, listen to me. You're the strongest person I know. You save lives every day. Now you need to trust these doctors to save yours and our daughters. I'll be right here, I swear. I'm not going anywhere." They wheeled Sienna into surgery within the hour. Marcus wasn't allowed in the operating room, so he waited in the family area, pacing like a caged animal. He had faced hostile board meetings, cutthroat negotiations, and billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat. But waiting to hear whether the woman he loved and their child would survive broke something fundamental in his carefully controlled world. He loved her. The realization hit him with stunning clarity in that sterile waiting room. Somewhere between their heated arguments and tentative attempts at cooperation, between seeing her fierce protection of their unborn daughter and watching her vulnerability, he had fallen completely and irrevocably in love with Sienna Vale, and she might die before he could tell her. Hours passed with agonizing slowness. Then Dr. Rodriguez emerged, still in her surgical gown, her expression carefully neutral until she saw Marcus's face and softened. "They're both stable. Your daughter is in the NICU, and she's a fighter. 3 pounds, 4 ounces, and already breathing partly on her own. Sienna is in recovery. The next 24 hours are critical for both of them, but the surgery went as well as we could hope." Marcus felt his knees buckle with relief. He sank into the nearest chair, pressing his hands to his face as emotion overwhelmed him. "Can I see them? Give us 30 minutes to get them settled, then yes." When Marcus finally entered Sienna's recovery room, she was pale and exhausted but awake. Her eyes found his immediately, wide with fear and desperate for information. "The baby?" "She's perfect," Marcus said, his voice thick with tears he couldn't hold back. "Small but strong. She's in the NICU, fighting like her mother." Sienna's face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I wanted to hold her. I didn't even get to hold her." Marcus moved to her side, gently taking her hand. "You will. As soon as you're strong enough, we'll go see her together, I promise." The next week passed in a blur of medical updates, consultations, and endless hours spent between Sienna's room and the NICU. Their daughter, whom they named Ava Sinclair, defied every prediction with her stubborn refusal to give up. She fought off infections, adapted to breathing, and gradually gained weight. Marcus watched her through the isolette, his finger pressed against the plastic as she wrapped her tiny hand around it, and felt his heart irrevocably claimed. Forever begins. 2 weeks after Ava's birth, when both she and Sienna were stable and improving, Marcus made a decision. He had spent his entire adult life building walls, protecting himself from emotional vulnerability. But those walls had crumbled the moment he held his daughter for the first time, and they had completely shattered when Sienna looked at him with trust and something that might, eventually, become love. He entered Sienna's hospital room to find her finally out of bed, sitting in a wheelchair and ready for her daily visit to see Ava. She smiled when she saw him, a real smile that reached her eyes for the first time since the emergency delivery. "Ready to go see our girl?" she asked. "In a minute," Marcus said, his voice suddenly nervous in a way it never was during business negotiations. "There's something I need to ask you first." Sienna tilted her head, curious. "What is it?" Marcus knelt beside her wheelchair, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. Sienna's eyes widened, her hand instinctively covering her mouth. He opened the box to reveal a simple but stunning diamond ring, the kind that spoke of classic elegance rather than ostentatious wealth. Sienna Vale, I know we've done everything backwards. We fought before we loved. We had a baby before we had a relationship, and I've been an arrogant ass more often than not. But these past months have taught me something I never expected to learn. I don't want to face life without you. I love you, your stubbornness, your compassion, your unwavering principles that drove me crazy but made me a better man. I love our daughter, and I want us to be a family. Not because it's practical or convenient, but because I cannot imagine my future without both of you in it. Will you marry me? Sienna stared at him, tears welling in her eyes. A month ago, she would have immediately refused, would have listed all the reasons why they were incompatible and why marriage would be a disaster. But something had changed during the long nights of worry and the shared joy of watching Ava fight for her life. She had seen Marcus transform from the cold CEO she despised into a devoted father and a man capable of profound love. You really mean it, she whispered. This isn't about obligation or doing the right thing. Marcus shook his head, his gray eyes intense and sincere. This is about loving you so much it scares me. This is about wanting to wake up next to you every morning and fight about hospital policies over breakfast and watch our daughter grow up with both of us there for every moment. I'm not perfect, Sienna. I'll probably still drive you crazy with spreadsheets and cost analyses, but I swear I'll spend every day trying to be the man you and Ava deserve. Sienna reached out, touching his face gently, her fingers tracing the lines of exhaustion around his eyes. I love you too, Marcus. I think I have for a while, even when I was convinced I hated you. Yes, I'll marry you. Marcus slipped the ring onto her finger, then kissed her gently, pouring everything he couldn't put into words into that single tender moment. When they finally pulled apart, both were crying and laughing simultaneously. Now can we go see our daughter? Sienna asked, smiling through her tears. Absolutely. Marcus agreed, standing and positioning himself behind her wheelchair. Let's go tell Ava she's stuck with us. 1 year later, the backyard of their newly purchased home in suburban Connecticut was filled with family and friends, gathered to celebrate Ava's first birthday. The tiny preemie who had fought so hard to survive was now a healthy, happy 1-year-old, taking tentative steps between her parents and laughing with pure joy at everything around her. Sienna watched from the porch as Marcus helped Ava toddle. Across the grass, his expensive suit jacket discarded and his sleeves rolled up, completely unconcerned with the grass stains on his knees, she smiled, her hand instinctively moving to her stomach where their second child was just beginning to make their presence known. Naomi appeared beside her, holding 2 glasses of lemonade. You look happy. Really, genuinely happy. I am, Sienna admitted, accepting the glass. I never thought I'd end up here married to Marcus Ashford, of all people, with a beautiful daughter and another baby on the way. Life is strange. Life is good, Naomi corrected, clinking her glass against Sienna's. You two figured out what really matters. Not everyone is that lucky. Sienna nodded, watching as Marcus lifted Ava into his arms, both of them covered in frosting from the birthday cake. He caught her looking and grinned, mouthing, I love you, across the yard. She smiled back, her heart full in ways she had never imagined possible. They had started as enemies, became reluctant partners, and somehow transformed into a family. It hadn't been easy, and it hadn't been what either of them planned. But looking at Marcus and Ava, at the life they had built together from ashes of animosity and pride, Sienna knew with absolute certainty that some endings were actually just beautiful beginnings in disguise.